It's no mystery that video games have been competitive ever since their conception. Whether it's the two-player Pong, where players try to score more points than the opponent, getting the highest score in an arcade beat-em-up, or even today playing against an enemy team in an online game such as Counter-Strike or League of Legends. There's also one more arguably niche genre of competitive gaming, that being speedrunning. If you don't have any friends to compete with or are too anxious about going into a team-based multiplayer game alone and getting yelled at by your team,
words cannot fucking explain how fucking dumb this stupid Master Yi is, bro.
You can always pick up speedrunning. The beauty of this art is that it can be picked up by nearly everyone, even complete morons such as myself. Some games have a built-in timer which tells you how much time you've spent on a level, and then there's games that are entirely based around trying to beat their levels as quickly as possible. One game that just came out at the time of recording this video with such feature is Neon White, a first-person action game. Now, I've been playing this game for a bit, and at one point I thought to myself, what is the first speedrun ever done? Now, this sounds like a very shallow question at first, but trust me, it gets more interesting, I promise. So first we gotta specify what it means to be the first speedrun ever done. Does this mean the first recorded speedrun, the first speedrun to be submitted somewhere, or simply the first attempt at beating a game as fast as possible? Many would say speedrunning started with Doom and Quake because both games had the feature of recording demos. Demos are a nice and simple way of recording your game and making a tiny sized file that basically recorded your every button press. So if you really want to get technical about the first ever speedrun recorded in high quality, it would probably be a demo of a Doom level speedrun that has been posted online the first. Most likely somewhere in the mid-90s. And that's where Compet.N comes in. Compet.N is the oldest website where people could post their Doom demos. Some of the very first demos were posted by the player Swendasa Huth on the 18th of November in 1994. So these couple of speedruns can be considered the first in some ways. But what if we consider speedruns as just early recordings of games being done quick, instead of having to fully submit them online as soon as you complete them? Well, for that we need to head one decade back to the days of arcade machines. For someone to even be able to speedrun a certain game, said game needs to have a specific start and end point, whether it's the end of the entire game or just an end of a single level. For example, we already mentioned Pong. While a fun game to play with another person, you can't really speedrun it since it has no set ending, which isn't what we're looking for. We could look back at the first game ever made, that being Tennis for Two, way back in 1958. But again, that game had no ending. Some of the first arcade games to have endings are Cloak and Dagger and Crystal Castles, the latter being released in 1983. It was a maze game that had 10 levels, 37 if you count all the sub-levels. Once you beat all the levels, the game is over. So can this be considered the first game that can be speedrun? Well, no, not really. While the game does end after you beat all the levels, there have been games before that technically had an ending. The most popular example being the classic arcade Donkey Kong, released in 1981. While yes, the game can repeat infinitely, you can just say it ends after you defeat Donkey Kong by making him fall to his doom. If we want to talk about the first officially documented speedrun, we'd once again have to go a bit further back than 1981. We have to go back to 1977. In 1977, Key Games released the arcade game titled Drag Race. A rather simple drag racing game. The game would encourage the player to get the lowest possible time, and some would argue that this wouldn't really qualify as speedrunning. If the game itself is telling you to go fast and you listen to it, could that really be considered a speedrun? I'm of the opinion that yes, it can in fact fall under the category of speedrunning, as even if you're meant to go fast in a game, you can always try to go even faster. Nonetheless, if you don't agree, that's absolutely fine, and I'd actually love to hear what your thoughts are on this topic in the comments below. But back to Drag Race. So Drag Race would eventually be ported onto the Atari 2600 by Activision, and would go on to be titled Dragster. The games were pretty similar, but within the game's manual, there was a message from Activision. I had a lot of fun doing Dragster. Hope you enjoy it. Write and let me know how you do. And if you break 6 seconds, take a photo of this screen and send it to us. So far, the world record, held by Al Miller here, is 5.74 seconds. If you break that, it will make news. Later on it was proven that the record was actually 564 seconds, but Activision considered that time to be unbeatable. This could be considered the first speedrunning competition, and players would soon go on to attempt and beat the time stated in the manual. Plenty of players submitted their scores, but one that stood out was a 551, held by Todd Rogers. He would get the Guinness World Record for this time, but this record would be proven to be impossible as late as 2017. A computer scientist with the username OmniGamer would prove that the best possible time anyone could reach in Dragster was 5:57 seconds during normal play. So not only did Dragster have the first speedrunning competition revolving around it, but also one of the most famous cheaters in speedrunning history. So is that finally it? Are Drag Race and Dragster the first games to have ever been speedrun? I'll go ahead and say that in my opinion, yes. Anything before these two games is either not documented well enough, or I wasn't able to find it. But there is one more quote-unquote game that can be considered as the first video game to encourage players to go as fast as possible and at the same time be the first one to have ever been speedrun.
Pop this piece of crap in, and what do you get?
Hey, Ducklex here. In 1972, a little thing called the Magnavox Odyssey was released into the world. It is the world's first home video game console. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, I didn't expect you to. Most of you are like 7 anyway, and unless you're a fossil or watch The Angry Video Game Nerd, there's almost no way you've heard of this thing. You can count all the games that came before the Odyssey on only one hand, those being Galaxy Game, Computer Space War, and the aforementioned Tennis for Two. The Odyssey is special in a way that the only thing you see when plugging it into your TV and putting the game cartridge in is just 1 or 2 white bars that you can move around with the wonky controller that comes with the console. You'd have to put these overlays on your screen and then just use your imagination. The Odyssey is primitive to say the least, but we're not here to talk about this piece of junk. One of the games this console comes with is skiing. Basically, you'd have to put this overlay on that had a transparent thin path, and the player is tasked with keeping the light on the path and reaching the goal. The game encouraged the player to do this as quickly as possible, and because the game didn't have a built-in timer, players were supposed to keep track of their own time. If you really want to reach here, you could say that this skiing video game, if you can even call it that, is the origin of speedrunning. One level that players try to beat as fast as possible. The Magnavox Odyssey sold around 350,000 units, which means one of the people who bought this system are probably the world record holder for the fastest completed time of the skiing game. And chances are that it is also the longest standing video game world record, considering how little people probably still own a functioning Odyssey that they actually still play. So we talked about Doom, we talked about the arcade games, we even talked about Magnavox Odyssey, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say. What is the first game to be speedrun in your opinion? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you wanna, you can like and subscribe. Special thanks to all my patrons over on my Patreon, and a special thank you to Sean, I guess. That's all. Bye bye.